Hello everybody. Okay, so this is Unit 3, Lesson 2. We are continuing with classes and objects. This time around, we are having a look at multiple document interfaces. So, main menu that opens different forms. We are still using classes and objects. You'll see that there's really not a lot that's different between the MDI and the SDI single document interface applications. What would be new would be exception handling. I'm going to have a look at that in topic 2. And then in topic 3, I'm going to do the planning and the coding of yet another example. In topic 1, I want to touch on a few things that I just want to re-emphasize. So first of all, the methods in a class, they must have one purpose and one purpose only. I want to talk about the object variable. I want to talk about creating an object before we use it. And then I got a interesting question. What's the difference between a class and an application? The purpose of each. And then just a quick look at the difference between SDI and MDI applications, but there isn't a lot of differences now. Okay, so first of all, methods in a class. A method in a class must have one purpose and one purpose only. So if we can have a look at program 46 that I did as an example in lesson 1, we had two methods, a buy goods and a pay account methods, and both these two are coded as procedures. You'll see that they mustn't return any data. Both of them simply get an amount. Buy goods, the amount of the purchase transaction, and pay account gets the amount of the payment. But I had a question from a student that says, okay, but normally after a transaction we need to know what's the new balance. Why don't we code these two as functions rather to return the balance? And it's a good question. So let's explain to you why not. Why must it be procedures and not functions? I will code a function whenever I need to return data that's not one of the member variables of the class. Okay, so buy goods just changes the balance. I can easily get the balance using the get property of the balance. So remember now, a class must have one purpose only. So the buy goods method must only process a transaction where the user bought some stuff. It mustn't do two things. It mustn't process the transaction and give you the balance. Then I'm performing two purposes. Okay, so I need one purpose per method. After a buy goods, it's easy to call the get property to go and display the balance of the user. So whenever you've got a method that must return data, this data that would be returned would normally not be one of the member variable values. So let's say the guy had to go and get interest end of the month on an outstanding balance. The process interest or give interest method, if we coded one, will most probably give you the amount of the interest, but it's also going to increase the balance because over there for that method it's part of its job to change the balance. But we want to know what is the interest, so that method would be coded as a function. Let's just repeat what I said. Okay, so here we've got the words. If we need to code a method for the client now that must calculate the interest on the outstanding balance, then we'd normally code that now as a function. The function will return the interest amount. But that function, inside its coding, it's also going to update the balance with the interest amount, eh? That would be part of the function's job because that all forms part of that. So that function would most probably be coded as public function calculate interest. Either it can get an interest rate as a parameter, or there would be a constant given in the class. So let's just presume we would get a rate, and this function, now I've got partial VB code and partial UML diagram. So let's just go for VB code by val rate as double, and this function will return an amount, so decimal. Very, very possible to code something like that. Okay, so, but remember, a class, one purpose. All the instance variables, so the name, in this example, the ID and the balance, we can get using the get properties. Over here, I'm calling the get property for the object. If I then go have a look at the object variable, very often we can declare the object variable as a local variable in a procedure or a public variable in a module. Let's look at an example. Over here we've got in the module for program 46, the example that I gave you, the object variable. Have a look. This just says I can store something of the type client. Exactly the same as what if I had public name as string. Okay, then it's a variable that can store something of the type string. I am going to always start my objects with obj so that you know exactly, ooh, that's the object that we're working with. And then I'm always going to include the type as the next part of the name. So object client of the type client. Take note, this is just the variable that can store a client object. It doesn't store it yet because we didn't create the object first, or we didn't yet create the object. So normally we will declare a variable to store an object, very often at this stage in the module. Then we must create the object, and then only can we start calling some methods or some properties so that we can use the project. If I go again to program 46 that we've had a look at previously. Over here in the module, we declared a variable to store the client object. This will execute right at the start when the application is first loaded in memory, as soon as it's executed. Thereafter, the user sees a screen like this, and the client menu is disabled. Users can't use the client menu. They can't process a transaction, not a buy or a purchase, a purchase or a payment transaction. Only thing a user can do is to save an object. Okay, so I'm running the application. There's an exit option. I can't use the client menu. We can only exit or save. So if I were to go and save something, let's just use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 for the ID number. Only validation is to check that it's 13 characters. If I save that, then all of a sudden the client menu is enabled, and now the user can buy on account and pay account. Now the user can. So, okay, for this client, which have got a 0 balance, they bought on account 500 Rand and bought on account again, let's say 200 Rand. And then pay, let's say 100 Rand off. And now we can even go and change the name of the client. So let's just say this is Sue and not Sue. Okay, just change the name. The balance stayed the same. So, very important. My client menu must be disabled at the start. I mustn't allow transactions like that. If we go and allow transactions, so I enable the menu right at the start, run the application again, and now without saving the data of a client, the user can immediately go to buy on account. And if we say, okay, 500 Rand was bought on account, but we don't have an object yet, no object was created, then the following happens in the program. As soon as we get to the part where the object is used, I get what is called an exception. And here they tell me there was really a big problem in your program. Object client doesn't have an object yet. That's really what null reference exception is called. The programmer made a mistake. So here they tell me object reference or object variable not set to an instance of an object. There is no object created yet. Only possible solution for me would be to stop. So I can ask the user, dear Mr. User, please just save an object first. Save the data of a client first before transactions. But that's never a good idea because our users, they normally are absent-minded. They're going to do something wrong. So we force them. First you save the data, then you can process transactions. I like to disable the different options. The user can still see they are available, but they can't go and do them yet. So go back to these steps, really important. It's got to execute in this order. Normally, because I want to create the object with user provided data. User is going to give me the surname and the ID. I can't just create an object. We first wait for the user to give me the data, then I create an object, and now I can start using the methods and the properties. As soon as we get to arrays, we are going to use the objects as local variables in a procedure or a function. Can you remember? Then we use dim, same as what we do dim name as string. So then in a procedure or a function, we're also going to go and define the object variable or object reference as client, as a local variable. Okay, so I did mention this before. We need to create an object before it's used. So if I have some code like this, it's going to give me a problem. It can't execute. It can only compile. Because the moment that I try to execute this, we will get that null reference exception, that problem that says there is no object created. So to solve this, either I can add new client like this to create the object, or then object client, new client, and we are going to provide the starting values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, like that. So this line will change the name from Ben to Sue. That's the line to process a transaction when the user bought some goods. And then if I want to go and see what is the current balance of the user, let's just say message box dot show, I will use object client dot balance. If I don't format it, it's just going to look like that. It's not normally a good idea. I would like to call that toString method that's available for all the classes. And now we know about toString a little bit more. So the toString class for numbers allows me some formatting, eh? So this will display 500 to the user. If I had for object client a pay account, I can't remember the exact name now. Let's just quickly have a look here. Pay account, call, let's say 200 Rand. Then this will display obviously 300, and it's nicely formatted, so it should look like this. If we just use N2, then it's going to display the number without any nice formatting. We normally want to always display it with 2 decimal positions. So something like that, a lot better. Okay, so create the client object, then we can use it. I had another interesting question. What's the difference between a class and an application? Purpose of each. So an application is really going to provide the user with some functionality. The user can add a client, view a client, register a purchase for a client, register a payment for a client, and in my updated program it can change the surname as well. To add a client, then my application will call the constructor. Hey, normally the constructor that gets some parameters, the parameterized constructor. If I want to view the data of a client, then I'm normally going to do this using the get properties. Get properties just sends back the data. Register a purchase. My class, I've got a method to do this, so I'm just going to call the method. Register a payment, and again the class, I've got a method to do this. I will just call the method. Change the surname. Now this would be done using the set property of the client's surname. Okay. Class then stores the data and the behavior of an entity. So in this case, the client class stores the data of a client, so the name, the ID, and the balance, and it stores the behavior, the functionality, the things I can do with the client, and functionality will always be the get properties, the set properties, because I would normally go and include all of them. The get properties gives me back the data so that it can be displayed in the application. the set properties allows me to change individual values. So either the name or the ID balance. I'm going to show you a little bit later on. We prefer that the methods would be used. These methods that changes the balance after a purchase and a payment. But for now, somebody can just change the balance value as well. Then some methods. These two methods, they are forming the real functionality of the class, the real things that the class is doing. The rest of the things, the get and the set properties, the constructors, and the toString method, that's sort of like the skeleton. They've always got to be there, but nobody can see them or see them that directly. The buy goods and the payment methods, they are the real methods that's going to be used. So I normally always need a default constructor, initial data, and this data would be supplied by the programmer. Hey, it's the programmer that's going to assign data now in the default constructor. I will have a look at the class again. And then I've got a constructor that gets some parameters, also for initial data, but this data would be supplied by the user. So normally, somewhere in the application, the user can specify what's the starting values, click a save or something like that button, and that save button will create an object using the parameterized constructor. And then normally we've got a toString method. For now, we're not going to use it too much. It doesn't give me neat user-friendly values. But we're really going to use it when we start to save the data to a file, which would be used in a few weeks from now. Okay. So if I then have a look at the class again, maybe I specify everything that you already know, and it's sometimes good to listen. We're normally going to provide a UML diagram. This tells me what data, it's in the middle, and what special methods right at the bottom to provide. Data would normally be private. The minus shows me that. The name and the data type is specified. And if the list of methods are specified with a plus, they need to be public, otherwise other people, my application for example, can't use it. The name would be specified, the parameters, and if it's a function, the return data would be specified as well. So from that we can code the class. Normally we're always going to switch on the options, otherwise program doesn't warn you if you do stupid things. And we can specify each one of the member variables, the data. How do I do it? Easiest is if I start with prop, press tab again, and let's say I wanted to store the surname. I change surname, I press tab, and now I can specify a new type, but this surname must be a string. The member variable must always have an underscore and start with a lowercase name. The property name would always be the uppercase version of the member variable. That's a big must. In programming, that's what everybody do. Okay? And the rest of the code were automatically adjusted. So the get property just says send back the member variable. And the set property gets a parameter with a new value and it assigns that to the member variable. And this is where we can add a validation. We can now add a test. If that parameter is not at least, So we can specify it must be 3 characters long before it is assigned. Up until now, we didn't do anything if it's wrong. Okay? We just silently ignored it. What's going to happen in that case? Have a look. I'm just deleting that. Our client doesn't really need a surname. Our ID number is a good example. Only if the ID has got the right length do we assign the data. So if I go and execute the program again, supply beginner data, but wrong ID number length, then nothing gets assigned. That's what's happening right now. We don't really like that. We'd like to let the user know, hey, you fool, you did something wrong. So we'll get to that in this section. We're going to tell the user, no, ID number can only be 13 characters long. So work on it. But for now, only if it's valid we assign. I've got a default constructor. Default constructor doesn't get any parameters. And programmer supplied starting values are assigned to the properties. Hey? I'm never going to use the member variables. I'm always using the properties. This will have the effect that the validations gets executed. Because as soon as I assign something, it says, okay, automatically I will call the set section of the property, the set property, to do that validation for me. So this will check that there's at least 3 characters over here. The set property will check that the ID number is 13 characters long. And if I assign 0 to a balance, it's automatically going to check that that value is 0 or bigger. So if I were to assign -2, at this stage nothing is going to happen because I don't do anything if the data is wrong. In the constructor that gets parameters, so easiest way to call it is the parameters constructor. Remember, constructors are special methods, special procedures. They need to have the name new. I can't pick any other name. Name must be new in VB. Other languages have got other rules for constructors. What I want you to do over there is always to say this is the parameter name, that's the parameter ID. So don't call this name, but something like parameter name or initial name. Why? So that you don't get confused at this stage, and there's another reason as well, but we're only going to really work with that in development software 2.2. I want to take the parameter and assign that to the property. And if you call both of them name, well, the program actually will get confused, but you, the user, will also get confused. So, parameter name assigned to the property. And this again will ensure that the validation is executed, that if statement. Buy goods gets an amount, test that it's good, assign it to the balance. Don't do anything if it's not good, eh? The same over there. We're going to see how to do these. If something is wrong, I need to let the user know. And then the toString method just sends back all the data with a comma in between. Take note. Let's just increase this a little bit, or the balance we're not going to send back with a currency formatted value. Otherwise, when we go and save from strings and read from files and read from files, we're going to run into some problems over there. Okay, so this is a recap of the class. My object variable or object reference is stored in the module just so that all the different events can access that specific data. Save button gets the data, creates the object, save it in the object variable, object reference specified in the module. And then show client is called, and it uses the get properties to display all the data. And here I want it nice and user friendly, so we're not going to have a look how awful if I comment this out and I do something like this: list output dot items dot add object client. It's got a toString method. So I could have used the toString method. I could have called it over there. But if I run this program, let's just go for Sue. We're not really going to worry about the ID. That's not user friendly at all, hey? This part over here, not user friendly at all. We need to provide nice description. So we're not going to use the toString method right now. I will display individual values with a proper description every time in the list box. So if I run this now, Sue with no ID, I can neatly see the data. Okay, balance is 500. We always want to have very neat user output that the user can understand. Okay, if I then have a look at the difference between a single document interface and a multiple document interface, then the only difference at this stage would be that the multiple document interface would have different forms. So one form to save the client data, one form to register maybe payments, another form to register purchase transactions, and another form to go and display the data. But if we save our data in a module, it's perfectly fine. My code will use it same as before. Okay, thank you. This is then the end of the first topic. The next topic, exception handling. I'm going to discuss exception handling in detail. And then we're going to have a look at the planning. Thank you.